Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere Akine. Is this the home brand budget white bread and table spread? Well, here's the big stuff. 20 hours of free early childcare is extended to 2-year-olds. $5 prescription co-payments are gone. 100,000 more homes will be insulated. There's half-price rides for under 25s on public transport. $6 billion for building back better in the face of climate change. And a tax hike. The super wealthy funneling funds through trusts get pinged, plus a budget bonus. The recession is apparently cancelled. And we'll have all the other stuff that happened while Grant Robertson was hunched over his calculator. You can watch us live on the RNZ website, Facebook and Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Mārie. Good afternoon, I'm Evie Ashton. Young families are the target of Budget 2023, with a promise to extend the 20 free hours subsidy to 2-year-olds, but only from next March. Children under 13 will travel free on public transport from July 1st, and it'll be half price for those under 25. There are also savings on prescription costs. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Finance Minister Grant Robertson has increased the amount he can spend this year and in the future. The government will also borrow more, partly to cover the cost of the cyclone, meaning a return to surplus a year later than initially forecast. He argues there's money to help with immediate cost pressures and some, like the big spend up on infrastructure, with an eye to the future. Nationals dubbed it the blowout budget, with the government spending more and failing to deliver tax relief. It says New Zealanders are already paying for the government's addiction to spending, and this budget will mean higher interest rates for longer.
The Finance Minister says the budget is about targeted support.
We know many New Zealanders are doing it tough right now, and we are here to support them as we have done over recent years. Doing the basics well, including providing strong investment in the services that New Zealanders rely on, has to be the priority right now.
Grant Robertson is promising his no-frills budget won't make inflation worse, despite spending billions more than expected. The National Party leader, Christopher Luxon, says the budget will only make inflation worse and punish people who are already suffering from a cost of living crisis. He says the spending spree will affect homeowners very badly and also create a massive increase in deficits and debt. The government is set to post sizable deficits for the next 2 years. Treasury is forecasting the economy will avoid recession because of the rebound in tourism and migration, but says a slowing economy will hit the tax take and increase spending. But it also says unemployment will increase and interest rates will stay higher for longer. The government is also set to borrow $20 billion more than previously forecast to help pay for cyclone reconstruction and future infrastructure projects. There'll be $71 billion of infrastructure spending over the next 5 years. That's money for building schools, hospitals, public housing and roads. Another $6 billion has been set aside for a national resilience plan, future-proofing road, rail and other infrastructure wiped out by extreme weather. In other news, police have begun recovering bodies from the scene of the Wellington hostel fire. A black fence has been set up, restricting parts of Loafers Lodge from view. Police plan to retrieve 2 bodies today and 2 more tomorrow. The death toll remains at 6, but up to 20 people are unaccounted for. Fire and Emergency admits it has inherited some huge legacy issues with the standard of its fire truck fleet. One of Wellington's 2 large ladder trucks was unable to go to Tuesday's fatal hostel fire because of a litany of breakdowns over 3 years. FEN's Chief Executive, Kerry Gregory, says all the trucks needed at the blaze were there, but the fleet has problems it will take years to fix.
Until we can work through that process as an organisation of what we've inherited, we're going to have some times when appliances don't make it onto the fireground.
The Professional Firefighters Union says the lack of a second large ladder truck made a big difference. And reports are coming in of several explosions in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. The city's mayor says a fire has been caused by falling debris. Blasts have also been heard in central Ukraine from apparent missile attacks. In sport, the future success of the football Ferns could come down to a change in training mindset, according to the head coach. Yitka Klimkova believes players need to learn better decision-making in front of goal earlier in their career if New Zealand is going to be competitive internationally. Klimkova is currently working with an extended group of players before she locks in her FIFA World Cup squad next month.
We need to start working even with our youth teams, with our young players, to have more like Millie Clegg talent who comes as a 17-year-old to this environment, and she's the one who is usually scoring goals. So I think having more of those forwards will help us to be more successful in the future.
The football Ferns kick off their home World Cup in July. Qatar has thrown its hat into the ring to host the 2025 Rugby League World Cup. France withdrew, citing financial challenges. New Zealand has also expressed interest. And veteran Australian coach Rob Wright says the Diamonds might be underestimating the Silver Ferns ahead of July's Netball World Cup in South Africa. Wright says Australia are playing a dangerous strategy by having such a tight turnaround between the end of their domestic season and the World Cup.
To only finish 20 days before Worlds, wow, Dame Nolene's 6-week lead-in is, I would be wanting that every day of the week, and wow, either they're underestimating New Zealand or I'm not quite sure. I wouldn't be doing it.
That's the news.
Rage on our roads.
It's deeply concerning that people can get that wound up where they feel the need to pull a gun out and randomly shoot at strangers.
A hospital rammed.
The fact that there were bollards placed in front of those doors into the emergency waiting area probably saved lives.
And a right royal chaos. The Prince saying that it was a near catastrophic car chase. Those type of details do not seem to be playing out in the New York Police Department's version of events.
Bumper to Bumper News, morning report weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Rain and northeast gales spread south today, turning to showers tomorrow morning. Some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Waikato to Taranaki, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, also Gisborne. Cloud increasing today and rain spreading south tonight and tomorrow morning, followed by showers. Some heavy and possibly thundery falls at times. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Whanganui to Wellington. High cloud increasing today. Rain tomorrow morning, then fine spells and the chance of a shower. Looking at Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Occasional rain or showers with some heavy and possibly thundery falls about Western Nelson tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, occasional rain but fine spells tomorrow afternoon. Mainly fine today in Fiordland, the odd shower tomorrow, then rain tomorrow evening. And for Rekohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers from this evening. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have traffic news and headlines for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. This year's budget buffet has left a few people hangry. The government warned it would be no frills, bread and butter, but one business group says it's just crusts and some thin spread. That's despite Labour unveiling a big spend, but with little in the way of election year bribes. As the cost of living continues to bite, it has dished up relief that focuses on young families. The 20 hours free early child education is extended to 2-year-olds. Prescriptions will be free too, and free tickets to ride on public transport, but only for some. There's also a big spend on infrastructure, about $70 billion over 5 years, to spend on roads, rail, schools, hospitals, and to shore up transport and communication networks for the future. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It was billed as a no-frills budget, a budget, conventional and boring. And sure enough, the election year sweeteners are few and far between.
It is a budget that does exactly what it says on the tin. Support for today and building for tomorrow.
Grant Robertson has picked his targets for support carefully. There's free public transport for children under 13, kicking in from July, and stays half price for those up to 25. Prescription drugs will be free for all, saving you that $5 fee at the pharmacy. The headline promise, though, is cheaper childcare, a $1.2 billion package over 4 years, extending the free 20 hours subsidy to 2-year-olds, saving some families more than $130 a week for that extra year.
We know many New Zealanders are doing it tough right now, and we are here to support them as we have done over recent years.
But hold up, that childcare extension won't kick in until March. Not so much support for today as support for next year. There's little support too for the childless aged 25 and up. In fact, some costs will go up. Public transport is back to full price for most from the end of June, and the fuel discount disappears then too. Never mind interest rates, which are now forecast to stay higher for longer. More pain for mortgage holders.
There are many things the government might like to do, or tax cuts that other parties might decide to promise. But for me, keeping our children safe, warm and dry at school has to come first.
The government is banking on people believing this is a belt-tightening budget, but in reality the spend-up is significant. The Finance Minister is spending $300 million more this year than he'd previously signalled, a bunch of that on cyclone recovery. It means the books will now stay in the red for a year longer, staying that way until 2026.
What we've got today is the blowout budget.
The opposition National Party is calling it a spending spree, with Kiwis paying the price. Christopher Luxon wanted to see tax cuts over today's targeted initiatives. He didn't get them.
Not a single cent of tax relief going to hard-working Kiwis. Not nothing.
The biggest blowout that we have seen today was the release of hot air from the Leader of the Opposition opposite.
For Chris Hipkins, this is a make-or-break budget. It's his first as Prime Minister and could well be his last. The stakes are enormous, with the election looking razor-sharp.
This is a budget for the times. It is a no-frills budget that's delivering for New Zealanders. Well done, Grant Robertson. I am proud of the budget that you have delivered.
But will New Zealanders be pleased? And sufficiently so to award Labour the governing benches once more.
I'm not expecting much in it for me, but I'm quite pleased about the childcare for young families.
Young people starting out with young families definitely need that support.
They should be adjusting the tax threshold.
This may not be a budget full of bribes, but be sure there is still an election campaign to go.
And that was our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch there, 11 minutes after 5. Kia amo tonu mai, do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Young families will get a helping hand from the government from next year when they'll be able to get 20 hours of free childcare for their 2-year-olds. Previously, it was only available for children aged between 3 and 5. The new policy will save eligible parents some $133 a week at a cost of $1.2 billion over 4 years. It comes as the early childhood sector struggles to stay afloat, with hundreds of centres having closed down since COVID hit. Well, joining me now is Early Childhood Council Chief Executive Simon Lauber, who was in today's budget lockup. Kia ora, Simon. What's your reaction to this additional funding for childcare?
Kia ora, Lisa. Look, like you said, we've been calling for help since after COVID, and this budget package looks like the government's now listening, so it's hugely significant for early childhood. It will really boost early learning access for children and parents. It really exceeds our expectations. But, it is important to remember, today's the first day and we're all glued to those headline figures, aren't we? But 20 hours for it to work, the centres still need to be viable too. So if there are significant fish hooks brought in on those conditions they're talking about, then, we're going to have another look at it. But on the face of it today, wow, what a big investment. 20 hours is great for parents. It is a really smart way of helping those families of really young children in a way that isn't going to lead to inflation issues in the economy. So well done today, I reckon.
So you're saying, though, devil's in the detail, right? So let's just have a look at some of the detail. Do you know how many 2-year-olds there might be out there who could turn up on doorsteps? What's the audience for this in essence?
Well, if you look at the current patterns of attendance, when you get to around 4 years old, you have quite high It's about like 96% attendance rate in early childhood. That's the 4-year-olds. And you have, that's kind of like the birth cohort is around 60,000 a year. So if you track that back to 2-year-olds, that's roughly the same thing. So we've got about 39,000 in there right now. So there's quite a lot of other 2-year-olds that could be in early childhood that aren't there yet. It's too early to really say how many new children will be able to get in because we're in the middle of a teacher shortage. It wouldn't even be possible to enrol them all now. But there are lots in there already.
So, Simon, tell me a little bit more about that, because it's all very well offering this, but if there is not the space, because we know a number of centres have closed, people are struggling to find teachers, if they're not the space, it's kind of like it's a disingenuous offer. So do you have the resources to accommodate this?
In terms of the space, we do have the space. There are enough places available, but we don't have enough teachers, so that's the issue. So there are regulatory requirements. You can't just have them turn up. You do need enough teachers in there to accommodate them. So that's really the point. So looking again at the budget package, there's stuff in there around pay parity. So that if we are able to achieve pay parity, it will mean a much more desirable career for people to want to become an early childhood teacher in New Zealand. So that's kind of like the longer term solution. And in the meantime, there's help for overseas recruitment as well.
How short are you, Simon, in terms of teaching resources?
It really depends. So across the country, there's a massive shortage. Like if you like those centres that we were talking about yesterday closing, so that's 91 centres that closed up to May this year. Those teachers are able to find positions in other centres quite quickly. So we're really, really short on teachers, but we've got plenty more spaces. We could gobble up lots of teachers into centres quite easily right now.
Hundreds, Simon, or thousands?
Definitely. I'd say thousands, but I am guessing, Lisa. The issue really is, I don't think that's realistic at the moment. We've got our managers who are teachers being, forced onto the floor of early childhood centres to try and make up the difference, and that's not sustainable, and it's leading to kind of burnout issues.
So by the time this policy comes to pass next year, in about March of next year, I think it's introduced, will you have the necessary resources, or will you still be struggling to recruit those people and get the teachers you need?
We will still be struggling. It's not going to be fixed by then, but it's a light at the end of the tunnel. You've got to start somewhere. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's really the start, isn't it? So there are teachers that it will make a difference for families then, but how many, who can say? And really, from our point of view, it looks like great news, but we do need to see how this will actually work. What is the detail? It's not a good idea to just trust that this is all perfect. We need to have a closer look at it now.
Really appreciate your time, Simon. That's Simon Lauber, who is the Early Childhood Council Chief Executive, saying there on the surface it looks good, but they've got major teacher shortages, and the devil will be in the detail. The government is making prescriptions free, saying an estimated 3 million people will no longer have to worry about the cost of collecting their medicine. It says there were more than 135,000 adults who didn't collect their prescriptions because of the cost in recent years. And in another measure, the government says will ease the cost of living. Public transport will be free for under 13-year-olds and half price for 14 to 24-year-olds. Our reporter Luca Foreman joins us now from West Auckland. Luca, how's this news going down?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, we're here in a pretty windy West Auckland. We've been out talking to people what they think about this new taking the charge off of prescriptions. Most people are pretty happy to hear, and so here's what they thought.
So I work in the disability sector, so monthly we purchase quite a substantial amount of scripts, and that's a massive saving for somebody that's on a benefit. So I think it's about time. I think it's wonderful.
I think it's a great idea because the cost of living, is so expensive, so you don't get much free these days, and medicine, wow, great, thank you.
It's more support for people that are struggling, so, when they
struggle to pay other bills and everything. I mean, they keep putting up electricity and water, don't they? So it's hard to beat those ones. So, yeah, it's good.
It takes away the restriction for people to actually go and get their prescriptions.
Yeah, but especially for the ones that are sick.
And Luca, you've also been talking to people about the public transport fare changes.
Yeah, so as we've been reporting, that's going to be free for children, half price for under 25s. People were pretty happy to hear this as well, although some were concerned that the older folks are missing out. So here's what they had to say.
As usual, I don't get it.
Just the young ones get
it. The young ones get it, and the over 65s get it, but if there's anything that's going to be cheaper, it isn't for the middle income.
I think that should have been done ages ago.
I think public transport should be improved. They've blocked all our roads up, don't they? So get them on the buses and hope that improves things.
Hopefully that'll keep a lot of the kids safer in their travels. And maybe, is it going to be at night when they're out partying?
Well, I think it's going to be all time.
Well, that'll get the kids home safe, eh? He's hoping, yeah.
I catch a bus to the train, then a train to the city, and then sometimes another bus to different campuses. So I reckon that'll be a big help.
Well, what about me? I'm not happy about that. Should be for, I think if they want the cars off the road, then they need to make it cheaper, public transport cheaper.
I think it's a good idea. I mean, because we're all broke.
It's a good idea, yeah. A lot of people, they can't afford the transport as well. I'm a bus driver, so I know a lot of people jump on the bus and they don't pay, they don't have any money in the hop card, so that would be good.
So, Luca, everyone's been enjoying half-price public transport for a while now. When does that come to an end?
Yeah, so that comes to an end at the end of next month. So those over 25 who have been enjoying half-price fares, they're going to have to pay the full price from then on. Also, the fuel tax will be back on. So, yeah, a few extra costs there for people.
Thank you, Luca. That is Luca Foreman, who's joining us there from West Auckland. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. What are your thoughts on the budget? We were warned it was going to be no frills, bread and butter budget. Is it? Did it live up to your expectations? Is there anything in there for you? What do you like? What don't you like? Text us on 2101 and tell us why. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ and the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time for us to go to the headlines. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
The Early Childhood Education Industry Lobby says the decision to extend the 20 hours of free childcare to 2-year-olds in the budget will boost access to learning for many families. The current policy applies to children from the age of 3. The government will also increase spending by $93 million a year to ensure pay parity with kindergarten teachers. The Early Childhood Council Chief Executive Simon Lauber told Checkpoint it was a great investment for parents and centres, but the industry needs more teachers. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says the budget is targeted at the people who need it most. Mr Robertson says while there is an increase in short-term spending, it will set the table to improve long-term outcomes in health, education, infrastructure and climate change. You can hear an interview with Grant Robertson on Checkpoint shortly. Fire and Emergency says it will take some time to improve its fire truck fleet after inheriting some huge legacy issues. One of Wellington's 2 large ladder trucks was unable to go to Tuesday's fatal hostel fire because of several breakdowns over the past 3 years. FEN's Chief Executive Kerry Gregory says it's undertaking a capital investment program to improve the fleet. And Maritime New Zealand says towing the stricken container ship Sheeling from Tasman Bay to Wellington is a top priority, although it's unsure when it will be able to be moved. It says weather conditions and having enough space in Wellington are major determinants in the timing of the move. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic. At Centre Hill in Southland, surface flooding has been continuing to cause trouble for drivers near the intersection with Centre Hill Road on State Highway 94 today. A 30 km/h speed limit is in place there still. I will have traffic news and headlines for you at about 5:40.
Thank you, Evie. Back to the budget now. And Finance Minister Grant Robertson says there's something in it, the budget, for everyone. And he joins us now from Parliament. Tēnā koe, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Can you tell me one thing in this budget that you are most pleased with? I know it's like picking your favourite child, but give it a go.
It truly is. Look, I think it's that the cost of living initiatives that we've done are ones that will make a really practical difference in people's lives. It'll ease the pressure of the cost of living, but they're not things that are going to exacerbate inflation. And we worked quite hard to identify those things like the prescription charge, like the half-price public transport, the people who were in your piece earlier on. You know, it makes a practical difference to them when times have been tough. And you know that I can't choose one thing. It's also the balance of the fact that alongside that we are getting ourselves back to that more sustainable fiscal position, which ultimately helps us all over the next few years as we see inflation start to come down as we do in this budget.
Let's go through some of those policies, starting with the early child care for 2-year-olds now eligible. Is there the capacity in the system to cope with those children coming into it?
Yeah, and obviously alongside that policy, we are continuing to increase funding both through an inflation adjustment, but also the work that we're doing around pay parity and putting more money into the pockets of teachers to help recruit more people into the sector. So we recognise that if you're going to do a policy like this, you've got to put things alongside it that help support the increased demand that we're going to see.
We've talked to the Early Childhood Council and they say they're short thousands of teachers and that will not be rectified by the time this policy comes into play.
Well, we're all working together on that, and there's a shortage in a number of industries, I'm sure you're well aware, but we are doing more to recruit people in. The pay parity will certainly help for that, and we've just got to work together with the sector to make sure we can deliver on this.
So prescriptions, the $5 surcharge is gone, 135,000 prescriptions not picked up. People really like that, but the question they've raised, what if they can't afford to go to the doctor in the first place? What's there for them?
Yeah, well, obviously we've reduced the cost of going to the doctor in a targeted way in previous budgets to try and make sure that for younger people and older people that we do that. There is still the very low cost access scheme that helps people who are on very low incomes and have to go to the doctor more regularly. So we do try to do that. But clearly this is a way in which we can ease that cost of living pressure. 3 million New Zealanders got about 29 million prescriptions last year, and so clearly this is an area we think it'll make a difference.
Half-price transport for under 25s, why not for everyone?
Yeah, again, that's really about making sure that we cut our cloth here, and there's a particular group of people. So if we break down the different parts of what we've announced today, we do want to encourage people to be able to take their kids out, get around their communities, use a bus if they can, which would be cheaper and also better for the environment than using a car. But then we move into that group between the ages of 13 and 25. That includes tertiary students in particular, and that was a group that we did want to help here because they are often entirely reliant on public transport to get around. I heard someone in your piece who talked about the multiple trips they make to get to different campuses. So that's why we targeted it there. Going beyond that, as we have been for the last little while, is a very, very expensive endeavour. We've spent the best part of $1.6 billion over the last couple of years on the Fed and Ruck and half-price public transport changes we've had. It's just not sustainable to keep that going forever. So we've tried to target it to some groups where we know it will ease their cost of living pressure.
Because looking at this budget, and some people, some of whom we spoke to there on the streets of West Auckland, they're looking at it and they're thinking, is this it? What else is there? I mean, the Green Party says it falls short of what is needed. Business is not happy. They say it's crusts rather than bread and butter. Someone said there's cheese rolls for some and the cupboard is bare for others. You've got a majority, right, in Parliament. You're in a good debt position in your own words. So why didn't you just go for it?
Oh, we've got to deliver the right budget for the right times, and I think those people look at their own experiences of the last little while where things have been tough. They haven't been able to do everything they wanted to in their own lives, but they are looking forward to, to improving conditions. We've had to produce a budget that matches that time, and equally I'm being criticised for spending too much, I'm being criticised for not spending enough. That's how it is. I think we've got the balance about right here, and we will come to the election, all the parties will promise what they want to promise. What we've tried to say to New Zealanders is here are some practical things we can do to support you and help you, whilst also recognising those big spending budgets of COVID have had to come down because we couldn't keep sustaining that.
So you don't think it's a blowout budget either, as some people would say, the opposition parties, very much so?
Yeah, no, and as I just said, you've got one party in Parliament telling us we haven't gone and done enough, another one telling us we've blown out. We haven't. What we've done is we've got a policy that's appropriate to the times. We also had to deal with the issue of the cyclone, which came along in the middle of our budget preparation, and we've put another $1 billion in on top of $800 million we've already done to rebuild and recover. We've had to do that. I'm sure your listeners would have wanted us to do that. That cost is obviously not one that we had factored in when we started the budget process. So that's also meant we've had to look for other ways to deal with that.
If you didn't have to fund the cyclone recovery, what would you have done?
Yeah, look, there are a lot of different things. We have a lot of different bids.
Can you just name me a couple, your top two? What were priorities that you had to dispose of because you're funding the cyclone recovery, so that we know the direction you were headed in?
No, we don't do that. That's not the way it happens. The budget is a total
Why not?
package. But
in
it's
terms
quite
of transparency, you must have had other goals and aspirations that you were planning to fund before the cyclone hit. What were they?
We always have a large range of goals and aspirations, and the public can see what we've done over recent budgets, where we have looked to lift the incomes of New Zealanders, where we have looked to invest in supporting businesses and sectors. It's right across the board, Lisa. But what we've done here is said, let's deliver public services to New Zealanders well, let's ease some cost of living pressures, and let's start getting that infrastructure deficit down. Those are the important core things that we've done, and we've managed to do them as well as we can while balancing that against the fiscal constraints. So I'm happy with the package. The budget has to be considered that way.
Minister, you've got, what, about $5 billion in your back pocket still? And I mean, what's that for? Is that for the election treats?
$5 billion in my back pocket?
Election treats? Is that what that's for?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Unspent money, unallocated funds.
No, I don't think that's right at all.
Okay.
We've got future budget allowances of around $3.5 billion in each year, and that will largely go to cost pressures and some new ideas. I think you might be talking about tagged contingencies in the budget, and that's money that's actually...
What have you got left that you could spend in the lead up to the election on extras?
To be honest, it's very tight, Lisa, because that $3.5 billion a year for the next budgets is going to largely go to looking after the cost pressures, the health, the education and the housing. So it's actually a limited pool. Tag contingencies are actually tagged to something, and it's a question of how quickly we can do them. Some of those are things like wage settlements, where we choose not to say exactly how much money there is because it might compromise the negotiation.
You must have a little something in the back pocket for the election, though.
As I say, there are allowances there. We've got capital allowances as well, but there's a lot to be done, and that's going to be the challenge for all political parties, is to answer questions about how they're going to pay for the things that they want to do, because the discretionary spend here is not large.
You must have considered the fact that this could be your last budget. If it is, I know you're not going to like me saying that, but if it is... will you be happy that you have done your best for the country's most vulnerable people?
This is not going to be my last budget. I certainly hope not, and I'm certainly working hard to make sure it's not. Overall, over the last 6 budgets, I am very proud of what we have done for our most vulnerable people. You know, one of the highlights of my time as being a minister was when we restored benefits back to the equivalent levels of where they were when Ruth Richardson got rid of them in 1991. We've worked very, very hard to support people across the board. We've lifted 77,000 kids out of poverty, and so I am proud. There's always more to do, don't get me wrong, but I think we've done well by vulnerable New Zealanders.
Appreciate your time, Minister. Thank you for joining us. That is the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, joining us there live from Parliament. It is 29 minutes to 6. Kia amo tonu mai, do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is, of course, time for the business news. Ko taku hoa NINA, ko Nona Peltier, who joins us in the studio. OK, Nona, so the no-frills budget has apparently surprised economists with a higher than expected spending, more debt, and some business groups are feeling very short-changed.
Yeah.
So what are they saying?
Well, you know, the first one off the rank that I saw was from Westpac, and they called it the no frills budget. In other words, they thought there were plenty of frills in there and costs that they weren't anticipating. They were thinking it would be a balanced budget, so there wouldn't be new debt and so forth. That's not what we saw, so pretty much what you'd expect ahead of an election. Lots of, incentives for people to feel that they're being helped out through pretty tough economic times. But there is concern about some of the spending that is there. And for some small businesses, It's not anywhere near enough. They're saying that they've been left out. The farmers said no surprises or dollars in budget for farmers. They weren't expecting anything and got even less than that. So that was one impression. But there were a number of others from small and medium-sized businesses who felt that they had been carrying the burden of the economic downturn for a long time, costs and so forth, and they wanted some relief from that. They didn't feel that they got that. There was another group that was concerned about the tax that was introduced for trusts. So there's an implication there that it's wealthy people that put their money in trusts, but some low-income people also put their money in trusts, investments, and so forth. And some small businesses are also operating under trust, so they'll be paying a higher a higher tax rate as a result of that. So there's pluses and minuses, and really the tax piece was unexpected. So there was a lot there that threw people. There was some forecast that a recession was off the table, but it's only a forecast, and we know that forecasts can be wrong. So, yes, the forecast for no recession. Others are not so sure because with higher spending, it could be that inflation stays higher longer. And with that, more interest rates. It will take some time before all of this information is digested. The Reserve Bank monetary policy will obviously have something to say about government spending and what they're spending on. And one person I spoke to said that really the key is that it's a pretty good budget in terms of providing some groups with what they need, money, but the delivery is going to be critical, and it's something that we've talked about before. If there's labor shortages and so forth, it's kind of hard. If you get the money but you can't execute, well, that's going to be another issue. But, for large construction firms with infrastructure spending and so forth set aside for people who have been badly affected by the weather events. There's something there for businesses that are reacting and responding to those crises, risk resilience and so forth. Overall, though, the market reaction to this result was nothing. Basically, we watched the dollar. It went a little teeny bit up and then a little teeny bit down. But in the end, it finished up just ever so slightly, trading at 62.6 US cents, 94.1 Australian, 50.2 pence. And the top 50 index, it ended up 0.2% today. It was a 24-point gain to 11,976. Look, this isn't all that we have to say about the budget. We'll have lots more coverage in the morning, as you can expect, and probably over some time, because there is a lot here for people to digest. The experts certainly haven't finished their commentary on it, you can be sure.
Thank you, Nona. Ka kite. Nona Peltier there with Business News. While National is calling this a blowout budget, the party's Deputy Leader and Finance Spokesperson, Nicola Willis, joins us now from our Parliament office. Kia ora, Nicola. Let's start with the positive. What's your favourite bit of the budget and why?
I was really pleased to see increased spending for defence. We are living in a more dangerous world, and I've got this memory of the soldier who came up to me on Anzac Day and just said, look, we are not being paid enough. We're losing so many soldiers. You've got to fix it. So I'm pleased the government has stepped up to the plate on that.
OK, what about middle New Zealanders who are paying for their bread, butter and cheese?
Well, I think they'll be really disappointed. I think of all of the New Zealanders I've spoken to who say to me, I'm so worried about paying the bills. I'm worried about my mortgage. It's already gone up hugely. What are you going to do to get it under control? And they've said, and I'm worried that I'm not getting to keep enough of what I earn. And they got nothing today. Really what they needed was the budget to be really responsible, to show some restraint on spending, to take pressure off inflation and off interest rates. And they deserved some income tax relief. They got neither. Instead, we had a really big spending budget that the Treasury warns will mean interest rates will stay higher for longer, and they got the government continuing to spend with pretty wild abandon.
OK, let's go through some of that. People got free prescriptions and early childhood, an extension of the free 20 hours to 2-year-olds. That's something. And free public transport for some people.
Well, it's something if you've got children, and there are a lot of New Zealanders who do not have children. Equally, look, let's take that example of the 20 hours for 2-year-olds. I prefer National's policy. National's Family Boost policy says that we will rebate up to $75 a week for your childcare costs. no matter what age your child is. And we'll put that money straight into your bank account. There won't be a middleman in the middle dealing with the government subsidy. It will go straight to you for you to use for your childcare in the way that you choose. I think that is a better approach. We also are funding our policy responsibly by cutting spending on government consultants. And then I look at the example of the prescription charge, and I think a lot of us would have sympathy with the idea that those on particularly low incomes or with very high health needs might need some help there. There are targeted ways already which provide that help. And I just think of the chemist warehouse. They're already offering free prescriptions. So is this a big subsidy for them? And I think of all those middle income earners who probably would just prefer a bit more income every week than the government deciding what to subsidise on their behalf.
If you think the government, as you put it, is addicted to spending, and this is a massive budget blowout in your view, what does that mean? Does that mean National would pursue an austerity policy? Would you have zero budgets like Bill English did, 2 consecutive budgets of zero increases in operating allowances? Is that the direction you'd head in?
No, what we want to have is careful budgets where we really focus on strengthening the economy and we get our priorities right. And for me, the priorities are we have to offer income relief to New Zealanders who have been in a cost of living crisis for 2 years. It's only inflationary, Lisa, if we fund it through additional spending. And what we're proposing to do instead is to reduce some of the wasteful spending across government so that we can offer tax relief instead. And Treasury put out advice last year where they explicitly said actually offering income tax relief is less inflationary than more government spending. So we think that's a responsible approach. We also, of course, Lisa, want to increase funding to frontline services in health and education, making sure we have a social safety net. But
so
that means being
example.
really careful.
If you are wanting to fund tax cuts through cutting other expenditure and you believe that this budget is an overspend, looking at this budget, please give me one example of wasteful spending that you would ditch and explain to me why it's wasteful.
Well, I've already set out to you that it wouldn't be our priority right now to be spending $600 million on prescriptions.
So you think that's
the best use?
Wasteful spending?
I wouldn't. No, I'm not characterising it as wasteful. But what I am saying is that budgets are all about priorities, and we think the priority right now should be income tax relief. When I look at the budget, there is a $200 million loan in there for the mega-merged Polytech. That is the policy, of course, of Chris Hipkins, and already it is so unsuccessful that there's a blowout that requires a loan. I think that is wasteful. We shouldn't be spending money on that sort of thing.
So the medications, and this is really important, I don't want you to be misunderstood, so I need to ask you again about this. Are you seriously begrudging people free essential medications, a $5 surcharge being dropped, when you know that about 135,000 prescriptions were not picked up because people cannot afford them? You don't think we should give free meds?
I just think that the way to achieve that is not through a universal blanket approach. As I said, there are already pharmacies who are providing prescriptions for free, and the danger with this policy is that the government ends up with a double subsidy. I can understand why people want cheaper prescriptions, but what I want to do is make sure that actually we're reducing pressure on inflation, we're giving them more money in their back pocket to begin with. So look, free things are always nice, Lisa, and it's nice to give them away, but we have to get our priorities right.
Where's your alternative budget?
We will be presenting our alternative budget before the election. The government is required by law to give us an update on the state of the government books ahead of the budget, the pre-election fiscal update. We will review the fiscal and economic conditions at that time and present our full plan.
So no fresh ideas right now for an alternative budget?
Oh, well, we've been pretty consistent with some of our ideas. I've mentioned to you the family boost policy. I've mentioned in the past our policy to bond nurses.
And today the government's announced theirs, and voters probably like a comparison. So exactly when, could you tell us when your alternative budget might be out?
As I say, we will offer our fully costed fiscal plan when the government releases its pre-election books, which is traditionally around 4 weeks before the election. But between now and the election, we will continue doing what we've been doing, which is rolling out policies which state our priorities. And, whether it's our bonding proposal for nurses, whether it's the Family Boost childcare policy, whether it's our tax reduction package, we are making our priorities for New Zealanders very clear.
Thank you for your time. That is Nicola Willis, who's the National Party's Deputy Leader and Finance Spokesperson, joining us live there from our Parliament studio. It is 17 minutes away from 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback, and there's lots to comment on this evening. Tell us about the budget, what you think is in there for you, if you're happy with it, why, and if not, why not. Nicola Willis there saying National wouldn't subsidise prescriptions, she'd keep the $5 surcharge. What do you make of that? 2101 on text, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Also, the half-price policy for transport is for people under the age of 25. Should it be extended further than that? And you can email us also, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Evie's here with the headlines. Ana ia Evie, mina pita kōrero.
The Finance Minister says that he's most pleased with the measures in the budget that will help people deal with the cost of living crisis. Grant Robertson unveiled the budget this afternoon that targeted young families by extending the 20 hours free childcare subsidy, removing the charge on prescriptions and focusing on infrastructure. Mr Robertson told Checkpoint he thinks the initiatives will ease the problems many are facing. He says the budget will also allow the government to get back into a better fiscal position. The National Party, however, has called it a blowout budget and says Mr Robertson and Prime Minister Chris Hipkins are continuing on a years-long spending spree. National's Deputy Leader and Finance Spokesperson Nicola Willis told the programme many people will be disappointed. She says it will affect homeowners very badly and she's spoken to people worried about putting food on the table. Nicola Willis says the government should have introduced tax cuts. And business groups say there is little in the budget for them. The Auckland Chamber of Commerce says there was nothing to improve long-term productivity, while the Employers and Manufacturers Association says it's a budget for recovery and doesn't address worker and skills shortages. And the Citizens Advice Bureau in Auckland is welcoming the news. Mayor Wayne Brown has softened his stance on cutting funding. General Manager Kate Anderson says cuts would have seen it shut its doors. It's unclear as to what level of funding it will receive. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington. From 6 a.m. tomorrow, Friday, Adelaide Road will reopen, but to southbound traffic only. It will remain closed to northbound traffic as the clean-up and investigation into that horrendous Loafers Lodge fire continues. And surface flooding has been continuing to cause trouble for drivers near the intersection with Centre Hill Road on State Highway 94 in Southland. A 30-kilometre speed limit is in place there still. I will have news and weather for you again at 6 o'clock.
Ngā mihi, Evie. A no-frills bread and butter budget, according to the government. Crusts and thin butter at best, says one business group. A blowout and a build back broke budget are the tasters from the opposition. So joining us now is an expert panel to help us break down the budget buffet. Sue Moroney's a former Labour MP and now CEO of Community Law Centres, or Aotearoa. Phil O'Reilly, a business leader and managing director of consultancy Ironjerk Partners, and he was on the government's welfare expert advisory group. And also Dr. Ella Henry, a professor with expertise in business and Māori development. She whakapapas to Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa, Ngāti Kuri and Te Rarawa. Great to have you all on the program this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's do a whip around. Marketed at no frills. When they punched open the piñata, is there enough in it? Phil, to you first.
Well, it's actually quite a political budget, and I don't think it's going so far as to say it's quite a cynical budget, because it spreads a bit of sugar to those groups who the government thinks might vote for them come October, but really doesn't do much for the country or for competitiveness or productivity or for business competitiveness or any of those sorts of things. So I think I've got a pretty negative view of it as I read it. I thought, gee, is this the country we've come to? We can't do any better than this.
We'll come back to business in a moment. Ella Henry, what do you think?
Well, I was heartened by the increase in funding, particularly around cultural events like, Matatini, but also the amount that was being invested in infrastructure, because the reality is this year has taught us how vulnerable we are as a couple of lumps of rock sandwiched between two oceans that are currently in a maelstrom, to be able to help those people most severely affected and also build an infrastructure for the future, I think was a critical component of this budget.
Sue Moroney, the government said it was going to help out people who were really struggling with the cost of living crisis. Does this budget do that?
Well, look, it's an extremely challenging time to be doing a budget in New Zealand because, other countries around the world are all struggling with this cost of living crisis problem, but we've got the addition of the recent cyclones to deal with as well. And as everyone sort of comes out of the COVID era as well, there's just so many challenges. So I think they got the balance right in this budget. They said it was going to be a no-frills budget, and they've stood by their word. I didn't expect that. I thought there would be some big election year announcement, but there really has not been. It's been a very standard budget that is looking to shore up the economy, make sure that people are safe and well. But there is no big surprise in the budget. It's just really trying to keep an even keel in some very tricky times that we've got to navigate ahead.
And so I suppose that was the big surprise in some ways, wasn't it? Because always expectations are played down ahead of the budget. You get in there and then all of a sudden there's some big bang item. Will that lead to disappointment? Because we've been told, always we're told, to measure our expectations, yet there's always something. This time there wasn't necessarily that big surprise.
Well, of course, they're holding that till
New Zealanders
closer.
they'll recognise that themselves because everyone is trying to manage their own budgets as well. So I think people will look at that and say, yep, I recognise that feeling. I know that there's things I want to do and some really big progress that I want to make, but now's just not the right time for that. And so I think, people will understand exactly what the government's wanting to do for the country.
Phil, have they shot themselves in the foot without having anything super special in there?
Oh, they've really set it up to make big announcements closer to the time, of course, and they'll be related to tax and transfer systems. And they've left themselves quite a big number to do that, $4 to $5 billion, I think we looked at today. So really what this is about is spreading a bit of sugar on the ground for those groups and saying there'll be more to come. And in the meantime, Rome burns. I mean, there was a whole bunch of pretty wasteful stuff that was sitting in the budget. My favourite is, catch this for a little one, Kiwi Rail is going to get some money to do a business case for electrifying the main trunk line in the North Island. I mean, it's never going to happen. It's going to cost hundreds of billions to do that sort of thing. But the government said, let's just have that anyway. There's a classic where a sensible government would have said, do you really need to do that just this very year? But no, off we carry on. So it's not bread and butter, this is actually politics. And in that sense, I think it's quite a good budget from their perspective, because they'll be able to say, here's a bit and here's a bit more as you go into the voting booth in October.
Ella, let's talk about education and this extension of the free child care education for 2-year-olds, right? And it amounts to about $133 a week. Is that sensible spending? Who are they targeting here?
Well, I'd like to think that's going to have some positive flow-on effects for Māori families. We do have a higher fecundity rate. We're more likely to have parents and young children in our communities, many of whom could not afford childcare, and that meant that young mothers and parents could go back to the workforce. They can be more productive. They can study. So I see that as a really positive thing, and it's mainly going to really impact on those who've got access to early childcare education, because a lot of rural areas don't, and that's where the most impoverished Māori are. But at least it's a movement in that direction that I think is positive. The other areas of helping out Māori education, kura, I think those are really solid investments moving forward, and that will look, I believe, attractive to, the Māori, the voter.
So also the free prescriptions, Ella. We just had Nicola Willis on from the National Party. She wouldn't describe it as wasteful spending, but she said she wouldn't have done it.
It's so frustrating. Yes, you can get a free prescription from a chemist warehouse, but guess what? Those are only in the cities. They're not in the poor areas where people have to scrimp and save for petrol to come to town once a week, and where $5 on a prescription is a lot of money. So this is really going to help, the poorer, rural, isolated communities where often you have health problems that, as you said, people are not picking up prescriptions because they don't have the spare cash. This, I think, is a really good one for the most disadvantaged.
So there is a suggestion that there's money in the back pocket to sort of start sprinkling around some pre-election goodies. Is that a little distasteful to hold back that money for election campaign promises when you do have people who are really hurting right now?
Well, look, I don't agree with that statement. Election promises are things that get delivered in the next budget, not the current budget. So I just think that's actually a bit of nonsense that's been put out there, because, look, the fact of the matter is that the government has been very careful with the way it's spending. I do also, along with Ella, really appreciate the focus that has been on people with disabilities in this budget. You don't often see that in a budget, actually. I think they're the forgotten people in many government budgets. But in this particular one, they have been really careful to make sure that, so for example, the free prescriptions will be really great for people with disabilities. They've made sure that people with disabilities will actually get the half price public transport, and they've put another $863 million in for disability services. I think one of the lessons that this government has learnt is that even in the tough times, if you don't keep up with health and education expenditure, which is all they're really attempting to do in this budget, it creates a hole for another government to pick up another day. And those zero budgets that you referred to earlier that Bill English put in place, they did mean that there were now big holes in health and education that another government had to come in and try and resolve, and we're still paying the costs of that today. So they have learnt that lesson. They are not just slamming the brakes on spending across the board. They have made sure that they are keeping up, they're running to keep up with the things that if you don't do that, they cause big problems further on down the track. So I think, they've got the balance right.
Phil O'Reilly, you were on the Welfare Expert Advisory Group, and the government would say it's a totality of what they have done to support people with cost of living issues, including addressing benefit levels, pension levels previously, and this adds to their support package, right? Have they gone far enough? Have they fulfilled their promises and your recommendations?
Well, I think they've made some good progress, and I look at some of the things you can tick off. Some of the stuff they've announced outside the budget cycle actually has been quite helpful in that regard. And let me say, I completely agree with Ella on the idea of making prescriptions and childcare much more available to the truly poorly off, those living in rural and regional New Zealand who are really living in poverty. I guess my point is more that I don't need that. Why are you making prescriptions free to me? But charge me and give more to those who need it. And I think a lot of the debate is not about whether government should be doing that for people who are less well off, but the point is whether they should be doing it for everyone, and I just don't think they should. So that's the argument, and I think over the welfare stuff, I think they're on the way, and I really hope that if there is a change of government come October, that the Nats will continue on with that program, and I see no reason to suggest that they won't.
Phil, you said there's not much in it for business, right? But Ella referenced the money there. I think it's $6 billion that's going into resilience and building back better. Yep. That's infrastructure. And we're constantly told by business that infrastructure gets the economy moving. So that's for business, isn't it?
Agree. Could be. What's the $6 billion for, Lisa? It's not clear in the budget, is it?
Well, it doesn't specify. It's building back better with resilience.
Right.
Yeah,
I seem to remember some of that. It was called COVID funding, which went to all sorts of weird and wonderful things, didn't it? So, if they tell me what it's for, and it's for productive infrastructure, then I agree with you. I would back it, and I take a view that it's better than it should be for building roads. It should be for building resilient infrastructure, but until I know what it's for, I'll say, well, okay, that could be for all sorts of things. It's got nothing to do with building a more productive economy. The business community really wanted more out of the government to say, we're with you on reducing wasteful spending. We're with you on trying to make sure that businesses are more competitive. We're with you on trying to reduce cost and regulatory impact on business. Not much of that today, although I should give them a tick for one thing they did, which was to continue on with a program called Apprenticeship Boost, which helps get apprentices into work and get trained. Now that's actually very positive. The business community and the CTU both supported that in a big way, and so it's good that they've done that. But in the scheme of things, nothing much here for business, and I think you'll just see business confidence not take much of an uptick as a result.
Ella, can I come to you? They have raised the amount of tax trusts will pay, and they're saying that, that's to catch people who are funneling their wealth through these trusts, and gone from 33 cents in the dollar to 39. But no other adjustments around the income tax regime. Should they have gone for it now?
I think that perhaps the whole of New Zealand is reeling from the last few years of one crisis after another, the pandemic, et cetera, et cetera. And so there seems to be an air of conservatism about that. I mean, the idea of, let's charge trusts more, like somehow trusts are going to become so transparent about where all the money is that they're automatically going to pay a fair and just amount. I mean, good on them for having a go. They haven't had the courage to bring in the kinds of real tax reform that could actually transform the way wealth is shared in this country, but it's a start, and I really care more about the fact that they've put a lot more money and thought into things like housing, apprenticeships, education, early childcare, the stuff that I know is going to help my community of interest to cope with the next year or two of a global recession.
I'm going to come to each of you. I want a rating, please, and a quick summary of your reckons on the budget. You're going to have about 20 seconds each. Sue Moroney, please, your rating and your final thoughts.
Oh, is it out of 10?
Go on then.
I'll give it 8.
10's the stellar mark. What was your mark?
Right, 8 out of 10 for balance, because I think it's great balance. They are looking after the country's books well. They are not introducing anything that's going to make inflation worse, and they are looking after the most vulnerable and keeping all of our systems going, because we're going to need them in the future.
Sue, thank you. So, Phil, it's an 8 from Sue. Do you want to wade in there, please? Give us your rating and your final reckons.
I'll give that some balance by saying I'd give it a 3. I think it's a cynical budget. I don't think it resolves very much of New Zealand's real structural problems. It doesn't improve our overall wealth as a nation. It doesn't improve our overall prosperity, nor does it improve many of the social outcomes that we need to solve. And it will increase, I think, inflation. Will mean interest rates stay higher for longer. I think it's a fail.
Okay, Ella, you've got the final word. You've got about 10 seconds.
I'm going for a solid B plus 7.5. I think there's a lot in there to help the most disadvantaged and rebuild the capacity of our country to move forward a little more confidently. We have a great nation. It just needs some tinkering around the edges.
Thank you all for joining us. That's our expert budget panel.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Tēnā tātou, ko Ivy Ashton tēnei. The Finance Minister claims the budget will ease the pressure of the cost of living without making inflation worse. Grant Robertson told Checkpoint that measures such as half-price public transport for young people will make a practical difference when times are tough. He says they'll also create more balance in the economy.
We are getting ourselves back to that more sustainable fiscal position, which ultimately helps us all over the next few years as we see inflation start to come down as we do in this budget.
Grant Robertson says the budget also delivers public services and brings down the infrastructure deficit. The ACT Party says the budget 2023 will almost certainly boost inflation and interest rates. Leader David Seymour told Parliament rising spending will further inflate the economy.
It's a blowout budget. It's a $7.5 billion deficit. That's going to boost inflation. It's going to put up interest rates. We're headed for 10% floating mortgage rates as a result of this totally reckless and irresponsible spending.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, says his no-frills budget won't make inflation worse, despite spending billions more than expected. Patients will no longer have to top up the cost of picking up their medication in one of few new investments for health this budget. The government last year announced a record spending boost of $11.1 billion over 4 years, and most of this year's announcements focus on how that will be spent. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
From July, no one will have to pay the $5 charge to have their prescription filled. The government says 135,000 people didn't pick theirs up last year, and they hope the policy will ease pressure on the health system. Using money pledged last year, the government says it wants to eliminate the number of people waiting longer than a year for surgery by next June. But the plan excludes orthopaedic patients who often wait the longest. It says it will fund 500 new nurses.
The National Party says that it wouldn't consider scrapping the $5 charge for prescriptions a priority. Finance spokesperson Nicola Willis told Checkpoint that it wouldn't support a blanket approach and that the danger of the policy is that the government ends up providing a double subsidy. The Early Childhood Council is hailing today's budget as a massive win for early learning. The budget extended the 20 hours free early learning subsidy to 2-year-olds and provided more funding for teachers' pay parity. Simon Lauber from the industry group says the 20 hours subsidy is the top rate of government subsidy.
Expanding it to the 2-year-olds actually corrects a bit of a glitch in the system at the moment where the 2-year-olds are funded at a lower rate currently. So it's actually going to have a massive impact on services. You know, those premium rates applying for the 2-year-olds is a good thing for centres, good thing for parents, good thing for families.
Simon Lauber says the budget greatly exceeds their expectations. Auckland Chamber of Commerce Chief Executive Simon Bridges says he was hoping to see the budget have a greater focus on businesses. He says while smaller business owners will appreciate the at-home support, more could have been done to provide relief.
Overall, you say, what was there that's really going to increase the long-term productivity and ensure a higher wage New Zealand economy? Outside of the gaming incentives and what that does for one sector, I don't know there was a lot there.
However, Simon Bridges says the pharmaceutical and transport industries may be the exceptions. The Employers and Manufacturers Association says the budget is spread so thinly that business is left with only crumbs. Chief Executive Brett O'Reilly says it's a budget for recovery rather than growth or the transformation of the economy and doesn't address critical skills shortages quickly enough. He says the EMA is pleased with the multi-year approach to fixing and funding new infrastructure to connect key areas of the country. Brett O'Reilly also says it's heartening that the government is now not expecting a shallow recession. In other news, police have begun recovering bodies from the scene of the Wellington hostel fire. They have retrieved 2 bodies today and hope to remove 2 more tomorrow. Somya Bamiripati reports.
A black fence has been set up, restricting parts of Loafers Lodge from view. The death toll remains at 6 and the police say they can't confirm final numbers until the scene examination has finished. 92 people have been accounted for, with fewer than 20 people still counted as missing. But the police are also looking into other people who've been reported missing since their appeal for information. They confirmed yesterday the fire is being treated as an arson.
Fresh Russian missile strikes have been reported in Ukraine. 1 person is so far reported dead from an attack on an industrial facility in the southern city of Odessa. The capital, Kyiv, was also attacked, but local military commanders claimed to have shot down all the incoming cruise missiles. A mountain biker has been found dead after going missing in Coromandel. Police and volunteers have been searching since the early hours of this morning in Whangamata. The death will be referred to the coroner. And Maritime New Zealand says moving the stricken container ship Sheeling from Tasman Bay to Wellington is a top priority. The Singaporean ship issued a mayday call near Farewell Spit last week after it lost power. It was towed to Tasman Bay, where it's expected to stay until at least early next week. Incident controller David Billington says an ocean-going tug will tow the ship to Wellington, a trip estimated to take around 20 hours. Mr Billington says it's dependent on weather conditions and Centreport having enough space for Sheeling. That's the news.
Tomorrow on Afternoons with Jessie Mulligan, she spent the summer touring New Zealand with a 12-piece band. And now the Silver Scroll winning Asia is here with us to perform on New Zealand Live. Our critter of the week is the rare and elusive banded Bounty Island spider, found only on one rugged set of rocks far off the coast of the South Island. And they're calling it a miracle. The Dunedin author whose sight has been fully restored in the most unexpected way. That's on Afternoons from 1 p.m. tomorrow here on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Friday. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel. Rain and northeast gales spread south today, turning to showers tomorrow morning. Some heavy and possibly thundery falls. Waikato to Taranaki, Bay of Plenty and the central high country, also Gisborne. Cloud increasing today and rain spreading south tonight and tomorrow morning, followed by showers. Some heavy and possibly thundery falls at times. Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also from Whanganui Whanganui to Wellington. High cloud increasing today, rain tomorrow morning, then fine spells and the chance of a shower. Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland. Occasional rain or showers with some heavy and possibly thundery falls about western Nelson tomorrow. Bulla and Westland, occasional rain but fine spells tomorrow afternoon. Fiordland, mainly fine today. The odd shower tomorrow, then rain tomorrow evening. And Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers from this evening. The time is 7 minutes past 6. I'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Ngā mihi iwi, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The budget for everyone, the blowout budget, the Build Back Broke budget, Grant Robertson's sixth budget, headlines with a pitch to young families, extending 20 hours free early childcare to 2-year-olds. The government says it'll generate savings of up to $133 a week for parents. Continuing with the young person theme, the government's also making public transport free for children and half price for under 25s. Everyone else, get ready to say goodbye to fuel subsidies and half-price fares. Prescription fees will be scrapped too. The government's being slammed by the opposition for being big spending and giving the Reserve Bank more reason to hike interest rates. Kiwi Bank senior economist Mary Jo Vergara joins us now. Kia ora, Mary Jo.
Kia ora.
So it's been called variously the budget blowout and the bread and butter budget. From an economist's point of view, which is it?
Yeah, I mean, it was another big one. That the whole no frills budget, I think, just suggests that it was a much more narrow focus of the budget. You know, keeping those priorities really on cost of living and the cyclone rebuild.
So, is it a big spender?
We did see a lift in the government spending. They always were going to have to do that in response to the cyclone rebuild. Unfortunately, it does add to the aggregate demand outlook, which also has some inflationary implications.
Yeah, so talk to us a bit more about that. And also listeners will be really interested to know, is that going to have an effect on interest rates, their mortgages, their rents? What are the consequences of that spend?
Yeah, what was really surprising to see was Treasury's new forecast, which no longer expect a recession. It's a trio of the surge in net migration, more fiscal stimulus, as well as the cyclone rebuild. All of that will add to the economic growth in the near term, but it does push out, removes any recession forecasts. But with more aggregate demand, that does add to the inflationary picture and does suggest that, interest rates will have to stay higher for longer and keep those monetary conditions tight in order to get a rebalancing of the economy.
Could we see interest rates go higher than the Reserve Bank has previously said they will as a result of this spend?
I think the risks are always to the upside. We still have inflation very elevated, and the labour market is still very tight. All of that has inflationary implications, and it does suggest that the return to the 2% target that the Reserve Bank has does take longer. It's a bit more of a bumpy ride. Obviously, the cyclone rebuild and the inflation impacts there does frustrate the outlook for domestic inflation. So the risks of higher interest rates, I think that's where the risks land.
Okay, so we're apparently no longer going to have a recession. Well, that's the forecast. Also forecast to return to 1 to 3% inflation. I think it was by the end of next year, was it, Mary Jo? I mean, how much confidence do you have in those forecasts?
I think it just goes to show how uncertain this is with the net migration surging. That's really taken many of us by surprise, just how strong people have returned to New Zealand. So that does add risk to the growth profile. I imagine when we are to go back and do our own forecast, there'll be upside risk to the growth because of that increase in migrants.
So Grant Robertson was very clear. He had to balance the need to help people with the cost of living against what you're talking about, inflationary pressure, right? So was there anything else that the government could have done for our most vulnerable without basically upsetting the economic apple cart here? Were there other options?
I don't think so. I think they were really treading that fine line of having to respond to the cyclone and to the cost of living pressures without adding to the inflationary impact. But by definition, adding more fiscal stimulus does add to the inflationary to the inflation outlook. So it really was sort of their hands were tied with that regard.
Were there any surprises in there for you, Mary Jo?
Not really. I think just the fact that we had, they delivered on the no frills, meaning no, just keeping those priorities pretty narrow and just looking at cost of living and cyclone rebuild.
So is no surprises a good thing from an economic point of view?
I think so. I think in today's world, having just some certainty is good.
Yeah, okay. So the other thing I'm wondering, how much has the government got still in its pocket that it could spend, unallocated money that it could spend in the lead up to the election? Did you see that, Mary Jo?
Yeah, there was a lift in their operating packages, but it's all about the cost of living pressures. It does delay, this lift in government spending does delay the return to their surplus. Does mean we're running cash deficits for a little bit longer, and that's because of lower tax revenue and a lift in their expenditure track.
How much does that matter? A year later, we're going back to surplus a year later than expected. How much does that matter?
I think it just goes to show how difficult today's economic environment is. It's a lower tax revenue, it's a lower tax take because of the slowing economy. Yes, we're no longer Treasury's no longer forecasting a recession, but it is still a pretty weak economic environment in that your tax revenues are weaker and the expenditure track has been lifted. So we do start to see running deficits for a little bit longer, and when we do see surpluses, they're a bit smaller than previously expected.
Who do you think are going to be the winners and who are the losers in this?
I think the winners obviously are those, those in the lower income households who benefit from the cost of living measures that the government has introduced. But I guess it'll just, we'll wait and see.
Really appreciate your time. That is Mary Jo Vergara, who is the senior Kiwi Bank economist. It is 13 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Lots of feedback on the budget, so let's get to some of it, eh? This person says, sounds like a sensible budget to me. On the other side of the coin, budget equals lolly scramble with other people's money, says that listener. This one, I am a single person in my 30s with a student loan. I've got no children and I'm working full time. Although I am earning a decent wage, I am being punished financially for choosing to get an education. There also seems to be little in the budget for my retired father. Please tell me why I should vote for Labour. I've voted Red for years, but I'm not convinced I should keep going on. And a pensioner's got in touch to say, I'm a pensioner and the recent increase we finally received is eaten up by exorbitant food prices, crippling rent costs and rate increases for homeowners. The petrol tax is coming off, so the increase in the pension is just gobbled up and then some. It costs $55 for me and my 96-year-old mother to go to the doctor, so we think twice about going. People who need free transport are workers. We don't have teachers now, let alone next year for thousands more preschoolers to go to free kindergarten. This is a pale budget. I think there's 5 exclamations there. Some sizzle, no sausage. And Rick says, I called it the other day when I said if you're age 30 plus working for a living, the only thing you will get is more opportunity to be milked for your taxes and receive nothing in return. One more before we move on. Does the Minister of Finance not understand that putting money in people's pockets adds to the inflation fire when they spend it? Inflation is driving interest rates higher for longer, meaning young people with families and mortgages are under pressure for longer. Great work, Grant. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Now, ACT says the government is adding pressure on the cost of living, not relieving it. Its leader, David Seymour, joins me now. Kia ora, David. How so? How are they adding pressure?
I think the really big surprise in this budget is the $7 billion deficit forecast for this year, the $7.5 billion deficit forecast for next year. That means the government is pumping out $7.5 billion more than it is taking in taxes and so on. That is inflationary. It means there is more money circulating in the economy thanks to the government's borrowing. And of course, inflation is ultimately too much money chasing after too few goods. So certainly if you benefit from one of the particular policies they've announced today, that takes some pressure off the cost of living. But I suspect you're going to face higher inflation, higher mortgage rates, and those things will actually counteract the effect of that. Of course, if you're one of the people who doesn't have a 2-year-old going to ECE or is not a heavy user of prescriptions or doesn't have a young person that you would otherwise have to pay bus fares for, then you're not getting any benefit, but you will get the higher inflation and interest rates that are almost inevitable as a result of that massive spending blowout.
Okay, let's go into some of the detail of that because that is a lot. The Treasury commentary says the inflationary impact of this budget is only short-term, long-term evens out.
They certainly say that. I mean, I guess that's because the deficits are over the next 2 years. But 2 years is a long time for people struggling to make ends meet as it is. I don't think it's responsible for the government to make this kind of fiscal impulse. The Prime Minister has been saying that it's not right for people to be tightening their belts up and down the country when the government is not doing the same. Well, unfortunately, it seems Grant Robertson didn't heed that message. I'd also just point out that the Treasury 2 years ago told us inflation right now would be 1.8. 1 year ago, they revised it up to 5.2. It's actually 6.7 now. So, I think the kind way of putting it is that the Treasury is forecasting in uncertain times.
So, can you be specific, please? If you think this is inflationary spending and too much spending, choose 3 things out of this budget that you would kill.
Sure. First of all, if I was going to put $150 million into pharmaceuticals and medicines, which is not a bad idea, the first thing I'd do is I would actually target that expenditure at people with a community services card. And then I would either keep the rest for paying off debts or reducing taxes for wealthier people, or I would put it into the Pharmac budget, so when you do go and get a prescription, there's a wider range of drugs available, because we don't have enough drugs in New Zealand. So that's one area where you could have done less. This idea of early childhood education, in principle, is a good idea, because investing in people when they're younger has a bigger payoff than when they're older. But I would have taken a slightly different approach. I would be asking why it is that early childhood education is so expensive in New Zealand, and the anecdotes and stories from people who are trying to run early childhood education centres under the weight of bureaucracy that they find themselves are absolutely legion, such as having a labelled sunscreen for each kid, because it would be wrong to use the same sunscreen on all of them. That's one tiny example. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for reducing red tape and regulation around early childhood that could have saved that. And then when it comes to public transport, sure, but you face a trade-off, right? People want public transport to be reliable. Once the government's paying and the customer is not paying, one of the impacts of that is that the person that's paying the bill doesn't care so much about the quality because they're not using it. So in each of these areas, you could argue that they've actually reached for the government checkbook, but it's a little bit like putting the heater on full bore with the windows open. Possibly it would have been smart to close the windows first before pumping in the cash.
Okay, David, in the interests of, not just caning them for their announcement, pick something in the budget that you absolutely love.
Look, it's very difficult to see. There's a long-term commitment to infrastructure. 70 billion over 5 years, 14 billion a year on infrastructure. That's not a bad idea. An ex-alternative budget, we're the only party that's actually laid out our numbers, would have done something similar. However, again, I make this analogy of putting the heater on with the windows open. How much of the government's infrastructure investment will be frustrated by their own legislation in the form of the natural and built environment?
So you can't find one thing that you'll give a high five for without, a backhanded criticism. Is there not one thing in this budget?
Well, Lisa, let's just be honest about the context. We've got a real stress around people up and down this country with the cost of living. We've got major problems with crime, which hasn't been addressed at all in the budget. And we've got enormous difficulties with healthcare and education. And their major health initiative is to pay for the prescriptions of all New Zealanders, including those who can well afford $5 to pick up medicine. So, it's difficult to see where they've addressed the challenges people face around the cost of living, crime, healthcare, getting kids to school, making sure they're learning valuable knowledge. What in this budget addresses The fact that New Zealand kids just fell even further in the 5-yearly assessment of 10-year-old reading ability. So, these are really substantial issues. I think these are the reason why New Zealanders think the government's going in the wrong direction, or New Zealanders think we're going in the wrong direction. And what has this budget done? It's run a huge deficit, which will be inflationary. It's sprayed money at some areas, which people will appreciate, but I don't know if they've asked the full question about how they could have made those particular services more affordable before spraying money at them.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. That is the ACT leader, David Seymour there. 22 minutes after 6. And to other news now. Police have recovered 2 bodies from the scene of the deliberately lit Loafers Lodge fire in Wellington. The fire broke out in the Newtown building just after midnight on Tuesday, but it's still unknown how many people are dead or missing. Meanwhile, questions are being asked about whether first responders could have got there any quicker. Somya Bamadipati reports.
Previously, police said less than 20 people were unaccounted for from the Loafers Lodge. But today, Acting Wellington District Commander Inspector Dion Bennett says that number's become murky as more people are being reported missing daily.
The success of our appeal for information has also provided additional names for us to either link or not. So the number remains at 92 accounted for, plus some additional information for our inquiry teams to work through.
Dion Bennett says the debris is piled high on the 3rd floor and multiple agencies will be involved in identifying the bodies. Those who did make it out are desperate to find out when they can get their belongings, but the police say that might not happen.
Also worth considering is the property inside the building is damaged by fire and, more importantly, asbestos. There will need to be some decisions made about whether it's safe to return that property.
A senior firefighter says if 2 of the largest trucks had got to the blaze, and sooner, they could have got more water on. But Fire and Emergency says it had all the specialist equipment it needed. Clearly feeling the need to reassure the public it's got this when it comes to multi-storey fires, Fens boss Kerry Gregory pushed that theme at a hastily called press conference today.
I can reassure you, Fire and Emergency had enough crews and specialist appliances to respond to the Newton fire.
RNZ revealed yesterday one of just 2 of the biggest trucks in Wellington couldn't make it. It's been broken down for 469 days. The first pump trucks and smaller ladder truck got there in 5 minutes from Newtown Fire Station. But the big ladder truck from Newtown wasn't with them because it's chronically unreliable. Instead, the only other big ladder from Thorndon got there after 14 minutes. Kerry Gregory says the fire got the predetermined response required and other matters are under operational review. But a senior firefighter in the command centre at Loafers Lodge doesn't agree. Ian Wright, who's also national president of the Professional Firefighters Union, says the 2 big shortcomings are the longer response time, 14, not 5 minutes, and lack of any second 32-metre ladder truck.
They would have applied a lot more water efficiently in a more directed way to multiple areas of the building that were on fire and would have been available for any rescues that might have been needed.
Ian Wright is not saying more lives could have been saved, but he is saying it would have given crews a lot more options to fight the blaze. He says the smaller ladder truck was basically restricted to one front window.
It's more effective in its reach and where it can put the water because it's higher and taller. It can reach 2 sides of the building, so we're able to operate through multiple windows if necessary.
Fens says 4 new 32-metre ladder trucks are on order and an even bigger one at 44 metres. All 5 could be delivered by the end of next year.
To New York now, where a spokesperson for Prince Harry and Meghan claims the couple were pursued by paparazzi for more than 2 hours in a, quote, near catastrophic car chase. The New York Police Department says photographers made Harry and Meghan's transport challenging, but there were no collisions, injuries or arrests. The taxi driver who drove the couple says the chase was not that aggressive. The incident is, of course, drawing comparisons to Princess Diana's death in 1997 after being chased by paparazzi embassy in Paris. The BBC's Nader Tawfiq reports from New York.
Tuesday night in Manhattan. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are filmed leaving an awards ceremony in Midtown with Meghan Markle's mother, Doria Ragland, before the incident in question. Earlier, Meghan had been recognized for her global advocacy on behalf of women and girls and honored by the activist Gloria Steinem. It was the first time the couple appeared in public together since the Duchess's absence at the King's coronation. Awaiting them, a swarm of paparazzi and members of the public. The three of them were then escorted through the crowd into a black SUV, followed by police. And not long after, they say they were chased. In a statement on Wednesday, a spokesperson for Harry and Meghan said, "Last night, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were involved in a near-catastrophic car chase at the hands of a ring of highly aggressive paparazzi. This relentless pursuit lasted over 2 hours, resulted in multiple near collisions involving other drivers on the road, pedestrians, and 2 NYPD officers. While being a public figure comes with a level of interest from the public, it should never come at the cost of anyone's safety." New York's Mayor Eric Adams offered this reaction.
2 of our officers could have been injured. New York City is different from a small town somewhere. You shouldn't be speeding anywhere, but this is a densely populated city. And I think all of us, I don't think there's many of us who don't recall how his mom died, and it would be horrific to lose an innocent bystander during a chase like this.
Harry has frequently voiced his fear that history could repeat itself, blaming the paparazzi for his mother, Princess Diana's death in 1997.
Do we have that pap on the scooter again?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, we do? Really? Same.
In the pair's Netflix documentary, they are seen discussing how to avoid photographers camped out along the road. Prince Harry's statement is the latest action he's taken to fight intrusion by the press. He's currently involved in multiple legal disputes with the British tabloids and cited harassment by the press as one of the reasons he moved to the United States in 2020.
Right, so let's get to some more of your feedback, all of it seems, on the budget. You've got a lot to say today. This person says, as usual, there is nothing in the budget for single people. We have to pay the new interest rates on mortgages, etc. It would be nice to occasionally be noticed in both rates and super. Another person says, I was hoping beyond hope that the government would remove or at least reduce GST from fruit and vegetables. Wouldn't that have been cut household costs, especially favouring poorer households, and given people the tax cut National was paying for, also boosted good health? On our interview with Nicola Willis, a lot of you saying she is out of touch. This person out of touch with people on low income struggling. If they had more money in their back pockets, then they have to choose food for the kids, heating, my health, and prescription fees means, by paying prescription fees, it means they will look after their health. A lot in that vein, and many of you saying that you don't have the Chemist Warehouse in your part of the country. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow for First Up, Ko Te Kaupapa Tuatahia Pōpō, Lads Without Labels. First Up speaks to the people behind a student-led university program teaching young men to cook. 5 a.m. tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. I'm Evie Ashton. The Finance Minister says the budget is practical and will support many people battling with the rising cost of living without reverting to big spending budgets they had under COVID. Te Pāti Māori says the budget is focusing on the middle to rich voters and will do little to address long-term poverty. Police have recovered 2 bodies this evening from the scene of Wellington's Loafers Lodge hostel fire. Police say at least 6 bodies have been located in the building. And a power outage has brought some services on Auckland's southern and eastern train lines to a standstill this evening. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Experience the breathtaking virtuosity of accordionist James Crabb. Tonight, he plays Dragspil, written for the BBC Proms by New Zealander Lyle Cresswell. Also on the programme, music by Sibelius, his mystical tone poem The Bard, and Elgar's rich and romantic First Symphony. The APO and James Crabb, live from 7:30 tonight on RNZ Concert.
You're on RNZ National. I'm Evie Ashton with you through until 7 o'clock, and it's time for Trending Now. On the detail tonight, a dispute between a university and one of its wealthy donors has put the spotlight on the tension between academic freedom and how research gets funded.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Today on The Detail, Christchurch couple Grant and Marilyn Nelson have poured millions of dollars into projects they are passionate about. From saving a native forest, to academic work, to a legal battle over COVID wage subsidies. They fight for what they believe in, backed up with a lot of money.
He and his wife have ruffled some feathers, obviously, but that was his dogged determination to improve governance and also work for the environment.
But a $10 million donation from the Nelsons to prop up a highly regarded research institute is at the centre of a clash that's put the institute on the brink of closure.
Would the average person give away $1,000 to unknown people to do unknown things with $1,000? No, they wouldn't do it. We weren't dealing with $1,000, we were dealing with $10 million.
We'll hear more from Grant Nelson, but this story is about academic independence, how universities depend on the generosity of donors, and how much say those donors should have.
Yes, I think it's quite alarming. It's all sorts of institutes at all universities in New Zealand have issues like this. The university has proved itself to be quite willing to bend over in the face of actually not a lot of pressure, frankly, not just to retain this donation, but probably to make sure that it remains attractive to future donors.
The New Zealand Herald's deputy political editor Thomas Coughlin has been investigating the wrangle between the Nelsons and Victoria University.
Grant and Marilyn Nelson are a couple of Christchurch philanthropists. So they, in the 70s, I believe, started a building supplies business. Grant Nelson has been blind for much of his life, but was able to build this building supplies business from Christchurch. I think they started it in their garage, a real New Zealand success story. In the 90s, they sold the building supplies business. They sold it for rather a lot of money. And instead of, resting on their laurels, they decided to use the money that they made from the sale for philanthropy. When they were last checked in on, which was in an RNZ story, they were on track to give away about $50 million by the time they'd retired. So they have a reputation for being these very, very generous philanthropists. And along the way, they acquired this interest in donations and lobbying and the pernicious effect that was having on our politics and what gets done here in Wellington.
That kind of brings us to Victoria University. They made donations to the Institute for Governance and Policy worth $10 million.
Yes, so the IPS, as it was called then, has been around for decades. It started in the 80s, and the idea was a part of the university that would look at what was happening in the government and try and make it better. To be fair, they're probably not well known outside of academic circles or outside of Wellington, but they look at all sorts of stuff that happens in the public sector and in government and ways in which it could be better. So they've looked at water policy. One of their recent books was on the social investment model and how that worked and the pros and cons of that. They often submit on various things that are going through government. They've always had insecure funding. New Zealand universities are pretty poorly funded, particularly when it comes to research schools like this. And in the 2010s, Grant and Marilyn Nelson and their Gamma Foundation, the Gamma Foundation is the foundation that they do their philanthropy through, they started talking to the university about donations, one donation in the first instance that would endow this institute and give it a secure future. And the income from those donations was what sustained the IGPS for the last decade, basically.
So did they dictate how this money should be used?
Yeah, so in a sense they did. So when they donated to the university and the Nelsons and people associated with the donation, they agreed it would be to endow this institute, and they signed what's called a gift agreement, which sets out the terms of how the money that was given would be used. So that sort of is the legal agreement. The Nelsons say that they did want that work done on donations and lobbying. And this was included in the Institute's charter. Now, the charter sets out a whole range of research priorities, which is what the IGPS's primary interest would be. Yes, lobbying, yes, political donations, but also more general policy stuff. So it was never really clear in the physical document that this family really wanted the Institute to focus on these two issues.
And I suppose we should point out here, Thomas, that the reason you know all about this is that you've been digging away into this for quite a long time.
Yes, a long time. I first became aware of it when I read the journal that the IGPS publishes called Policy Quarterly. Again, it's one of those popular publications in Wellington. It's a wee bit tragic.
A popular publication for who?
Yes, I imagine it's quite well read from the top of the terrace down to the end of Molesworth Street, and perhaps not very well read outside of those of that area. And there was an interesting letter there which talked about the funding of Policy Quarterly and the parlous state of the funding of the IGPS in general. So I put in a few OAAs, and through the process of researching it, obtained a few other documents through the journalistic process, you might call it.
In fact, you got, 130-something emails through the OIA?
Yeah, 130-odd pages of emails. So, yes, I mean, some